In this video, we are going over one of the greatest battles of all time.
It's time!
Inflation versus wages. So let's jump into it. First, let's give a little recap of both inflation and wages. So inflation, remember, is an increase in prices over time, and this leads to a decrease in your buying power. So again, a good way to think about this is that inflation means the same money buys less over time. So wages, on the other hand, are what workers make for their paid duties, and wages can be paid either salary or hourly. And most wages will increase slightly year over year. But the main idea is that you want your wages to outpace inflation over time. And so that means that you'll have better buying power. So buying power essentially means, can you buy more or less than you used to? And so again, we're talking about the cost of basic items needed for everyday life, like housing, food, transportation, water, electricity, stuff like that. And so you want to know, is your buying power increasing or decreasing with items like this? So let's go over the 3 rules of buying power. And rule 1 is going to be, when inflation and wages grow at similar rates, your buying power stays the same. Rule 2, when wages grow more than inflation, your buying power increases. And then rule 3, as you can guess, is going to be the opposite of that. When inflation grows more than your wages, your buying power is going to decrease. So those are the 3 rules of buying power. And so to measure buying power here, we're going to use 2 comparison metrics of 2 things that everybody needs: housing and food. But in this case, we're using the example of hamburgers. So housing, to compare housing price of what it used to be to what it is now to what it could be in the future, you're going to do this calculation right here. You're going to take the average home price, so the average price of a house, and you're going to divide it by your income. And then you're going to ask this question: how much more is the average house than your income? And that's going to be the comparison metric there. In hamburgers, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to take your income and we're going to divide that by the average price of a hamburger in the country. And then you're going to answer this question: how many burgers can you buy? And so we're going to compare using those 2, the old ratio versus the new ratio, to measure, is your buying power going up or down? So we're going to start off with an example that goes over rule 1, and let's look at what this looks like graphically. So we're going to graph inflation is going to be the red line, and then the green line is going to be wages. And then over here on a separate graph, we're going to graph buying power. And notice how 0 is in the middle here. It's not at the bottom. And so if your buying power increases, it's going to go up towards the positive. If it decreases, it's going to go down here. So this one is an example where buying power remains the same. So if you have inflation that looks like this and wages that look like this, your buying power is going to be right about like this. So it kind of goes a little up, a little down, but again, it's pretty much staying the same over time, because wages and inflation, although they're going up and down as well, they're going at roughly the same pace. So let's look at this example in a theoretical, and we're going to look at, like in this case, housing and hamburgers example. So let's say that now average house costs about roughly $400,000. Average hamburger price is $4.25. Let's say your salary is roughly $50,000. So again, first let's get the ratio of housing. So we're going to take the average house price divided by your salary. And that means that it's going to give you 8, which means that the average house is 8 times your salary here. Let's move to hamburgers. So again, we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to take your salary divided by the price of the hamburger. And in this scenario, you can buy 11,765 hamburgers. So that measures your buying power at this day. So let's flash forward to 2040, and we're going to say a house, inflation has gone up a little bit, like in that graph example. So a house costs $600,000, hamburger is now $625, but your salary also increased in that example. So let's say you now are getting paid $80,000 a year instead of $50,000. So let's measure these ratios, see if your buying power went up or down. So average price of a house, $600,000 divided by your salary, $80,000, 7.5x. So house is 7.5 times more expensive than your salary. Hamburgers, opposite your salary divided by price of the hamburger. And that's going to mean you can buy 12,800 hamburgers. So again, roughly the same buying power in both examples. You got a little more buying power in 2040, but it's roughly the same. Let's look at another example here, and let's say inflation goes like this, but your wages go like this. So when this happens, your buying power will look like this, because this gap between inflation and wages got much larger, which means your buying power actually went up over time. So let's look at this example, and let's say everything's the same here, but now in the future in 2040, instead of making 80,000, you actually now are making 125,000, And let's say the housing and hamburger price inflation is roughly the same. So now if you do 600,000 divided by 125,000, that's 4.8x. So now you won some buying power there, and you can now buy 20,000 hamburgers. So now when your wages went up like this rate compared to what inflation went up, your buying power increased, and that's what you want. So let's look at another example here. And let's say that your wages go like this and inflation is going like this. Well, as you guessed it, obviously your buying power is going to go like this because that gap between inflation and wages, now inflation is way higher than your wages went up. So that means your buying power actually went down. So let's go back to that example. And again, let's say your salary, again, it went up, the wages went up a little bit, but again, let's say you're now at 80,000, but inflation went up a lot. So now a house, instead of 400,000 is 850,000, and a hamburger is $8.75. So again, 850 divided by 80, that's going to give us 10.6x, and you can now only buy 9,142 hamburgers. So your buying power went down a lot in this period, so that means your buying power decreased. That's not what you want. Let's look at a few more examples here, and let's say that it looks like this, where inflation goes up a lot, but that your wages also went up a lot. So in this scenario, your buying power would still look like this. Even though both went up a lot, they both went up at the same rate. So again, your buying power not going to be too affected by that. Let's look at one more example. Let's say that inflation remains very, very low, but your wages start to skyrocket like this. Well, that means your buying power, look, it's almost off the page now, and that is the ideal scenario. That's obviously what you want. So I'll leave you with this poem here. May your wages be high and your inflation be low. If these two things happen, a smile you will surely show. Have a nice day.